The plasma cannon fire had finally stopped echoing across the barren landscape of Kepler 442b, leaving behind only the acrid smell of burned ozone and the groans of the wounded. Sergeant Marcus Chen crouched behind the twisted remains of what had once been a transport vehicle, his medical kit clutched tightly in his hands as he scanned the battlefield for survivors. The war between the Terran Coalition and the Zephyrian Empire had been raging for 3 years now, with this rocky planet serving as yet another contested frontier. Marcus had seen enough carnage to last several lifetimes, but his oath as a combat medic kept him moving forward, always searching for the next life he could save. As he moved carefully through the debris field, stepping over chunks of metal and avoiding the still glowing craters left by energy weapons, Marcus heard something that made him freeze. It was a low, pained whimpering sound, unlike anything he had heard from human throats. The sound was coming from behind a large boulder about 50 meters to his left. Marcus approached cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the sidearm at his hip. The Coalition had strict rules about treating enemy combatants, but, in the heat of battle, distinguishing between friend and foe could mean the difference between life and death. As he rounded the boulder, what he saw made him stop in his tracks. Lying in a pool of dark blue blood was a creature unlike anything Marcus had encountered in his 2 years of combat on various alien worlds. The being was roughly the size of a large wolf, but its body was covered in what appeared to be natural armor plating that shimmered with an iridescent quality. Its limbs were longer and more muscular than any Earth canine, ending in retractable claws that were currently extended and digging furrows in the rocky ground as the creature writhed in pain. The alien's head was distinctly lupin, but larger and more intelligent-looking, with forward-facing eyes that glowed with an inner amber light. Those eyes were now dim with pain and approaching death, but Marcus could see the intelligence behind them, the awareness of its own mortality. A massive wound had been torn across the creature's torso, likely from a human plasma rifle based on the burn patterns Marcus had learned to recognize. The alien's breathing was labored and shallow, each exhale accompanied by that heartbreaking whimpering sound that had first drawn Marcus's attention. As Marcus stood there, frozen by the sight, the creature's eyes found his. There was no aggression in that gaze, no attempt to bare fangs or prepare for a final attack. Instead, Marcus saw something that transcended species boundaries, the universal look of a being in pain who had given up hope of rescue. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Marcus was acutely aware that this was likely a Zephyrian war beast, bred and trained to hunt down human soldiers. The rational part of his mind reminded him that this creature had probably been responsible for the deaths of Coalition troops, maybe even people he knew. The safe choice, the military choice, would be to put it out of its misery with a quick shot and move on to look for human survivors. But Marcus Chen had not become a medic to make the safe choice. He had taken an oath that spoke of preserving life, of treating all wounded without regard to nationality, race, or creed. That oath had never specifically mentioned alien species, but, as he looked into those amber eyes, Marcus found that the distinction didn't matter. The creature's breathing was becoming more erratic, and Marcus could see that it had only minutes left to live without intervention. He had treated similar wounds in human soldiers, and, while the anatomy was different, the principles of trauma medicine remained the same: stop the bleeding, stabilize the patient, and evacuate to proper medical facilities. Marcus slowly lowered himself to one knee, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The alien's eyes tracked his motion, and Marcus thought he detected a flicker of confusion in that intelligent gaze. Clearly, the creature had not expected a human soldier to approach with anything other than hostile intent. "Easy there," Marcus said softly, his voice carrying the same calm, reassuring tone he used with wounded humans. "I'm going to help you." He knew the creature couldn't understand his words, but tone was universal among social species, and he hoped his intent would be clear. As Marcus reached slowly for his medical kit, the alien's muscles tensed, and, for a moment he thought it might try to attack despite its wounds. Instead, the creature simply watched as Marcus opened his kit and began pulling out supplies. The alien's head tilted slightly to one side, an almost dog-like gesture that struck Marcus as endearingly familiar despite the circumstances. The wound was worse than Marcus had initially thought. The plasma bolt had not only burned through the creature's natural armor but had also damaged several vital organs. In a human, this would be a fatal wound without immediate surgical intervention. But Marcus had noticed that the alien's physiology seemed more robust than human anatomy, with what appeared to be redundant organ systems and a more efficient circulatory structure. Working quickly but carefully, Marcus began cleaning the wound with antiseptic gel. The creature flinched at the contact but didn't pull away, seeming to understand that Marcus was trying to help. As he worked, Marcus found himself talking to the alien, maintaining a steady stream of reassuring commentary that seemed to help keep the creature calm. "That's it, just stay still," Marcus murmured as he applied synthetic tissue patches to the worst of the damaged areas. "These are going to feel cold, but they'll help stop the bleeding. You're doing great, just keep breathing for me." The alien's eyes never left Marcus's face as he worked, and gradually the medic began to see something that made his heart race with excitement and wonder. The creature was learning. It was watching his movements, observing his techniques, and Marcus could almost see the gears turning behind those amber eyes as the alien began to understand not just that Marcus was helping, but how he was helping. When a particularly painful procedure caused the creature to whimper and bare its fangs, Marcus paused and placed one hand gently on the alien's head, between its ears. The gesture was instinctive, the same comforting touch you might give to an injured dog, but the effect was immediate and profound. The creature's muscles relaxed, and it closed its eyes briefly, leaning almost imperceptibly into Marcus's touch. It was in that moment that Marcus realized he was not just treating a wounded animal. This was a sentient being, capable of complex thought and emotion, and it was choosing to trust him despite every evolutionary instinct that should have made it see him as an enemy. The weight of that trust settled on Marcus's shoulders like a mantle, and he found himself more determined than ever to save this creature's life. As he continued working, applying pressure bandages and administering pain medication that he hoped would be compatible with the alien's biochemistry, Marcus became aware of sounds in the distance. Human voices, calling out coordinates and casualty reports. His unit was conducting a sweep of the battlefield, and they would reach his position within minutes. Marcus felt a surge of panic as he realized the implications. His fellow soldiers would see only an enemy combatant, a threat to be eliminated. They wouldn't understand what Marcus had discovered about this creature's intelligence, its capacity for trust and understanding. They would see a military target and react accordingly. The alien seemed to sense Marcus's sudden tension, and its eyes opened to study his face with renewed alertness. Marcus could see that the creature was also aware of the approaching sounds, and he watched as its ears swiveled to track the human voices. But, instead of fear or aggression, Marcus saw resignation in those amber eyes, as if the creature had accepted its fate and was grateful for these few minutes of compassion before the inevitable end. That look of resigned acceptance galvanized Marcus into action. He couldn't let this remarkable being die, not when he had come so close to saving it. But he also couldn't endanger his fellow soldiers by harboring what they would rightfully see as an enemy combatant. He needed a solution, and he needed it quickly. Looking around frantically, Marcus spotted a natural cave formation about 30 meters away, partially hidden by fallen rocks and twisted metal debris. It would provide shelter and concealment, at least temporarily. But moving the injured alien would be risky, and he wasn't even sure the creature would allow itself to be moved. Marcus leaned down close to the alien's head and spoke in the same calm, reassuring tone he had been using throughout the treatment. "Listen to me," he said, placing one hand on the creature's shoulder. "My people are coming, and they won't understand. I need to move you somewhere safe. Do you trust me?" The alien's response was immediate and unambiguous. It struggled to rise, clearly in considerable pain but determined to follow Marcus's lead. The sight of this wounded creature, this enemy combatant, placing its life entirely in the hands of a human soldier, was almost overwhelming. Marcus had to blink back tears as he helped support the alien's weight and began the slow, careful journey toward the cave. Each step was agony for the wounded creature, but it never faltered, never pulled back or showed aggression. Instead, it leaned against Marcus for support, its breathing labored but steady, its trust absolute. As they reached the cave entrance, Marcus could hear his squad mates getting closer, their voices now clearly audible as they called out grid references and casualty counts. Inside the cave, Marcus helped the alien lie down on a relatively flat section of stone floor. He quickly checked his field dressings to make sure they were secure, then pulled out one of his emergency ration packs and a water bottle. He had no idea if human food would be safe for the alien to consume, but water was universal, and the creature was clearly suffering from dehydration in addition to its injuries. The alien accepted both offerings gratefully, its intelligent eyes never leaving Marcus's face as it carefully tasted the human rations. The food seemed to agree with its system, and Marcus watched as some color returned to its amber eyes and its breathing became slightly less labored. "Sergeant Chen." The voice of his squad leader, Lieutenant Rodriguez, echoed across the battlefield. "Report your status." Marcus moved to the cave entrance, positioning himself so that he blocked any view of the interior. "Here, sir," he called back. "I'm checking some caves for wounded. Found some equipment but no survivors so far." "Copy that. Finish your sweep and return to Rally Point Bravo in 15 minutes. We're pulling back to the forward operating base." "Understood, sir." Chen out. Marcus returned to where the alien lay watching him with those remarkably expressive eyes. The creature had clearly understood that Marcus had just lied to his superiors to protect it, and the gratitude in its gaze was unmistakable. Marcus knelt beside the alien and checked its wounds again, pleased to see that his treatment was holding and the bleeding had stopped. "I have to go," Marcus said softly, his hand once again finding that spot between the creature's ears. "But I'll come back for you. I promise." The alien's response was a soft sound that might have been acknowledgement, or perhaps simply contentment at Marcus's gentle touch. As Marcus prepared to leave, he was struck by a sudden impulse. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small medical sensor, a device designed to monitor vital signs and alert medics to changes in a patient's condition. It was a valuable piece of equipment, and leaving it behind would require some creative explanation later, but Marcus clipped it carefully to the alien's natural armor plating. "This will let me know if you're in trouble," he explained, activating the device and syncing it with his personal communicator. "Try to rest, and don't move around too much. I'll be back as soon as I can." As Marcus left the cave and rejoined his unit, his mind was already racing with plans. He needed medical supplies, proper surgical equipment, and, most importantly, he needed time to convince his superiors that this creature represented an unprecedented opportunity for communication and understanding between the two warring species. It would not be easy, but Marcus had never backed down from a challenge, especially one that involved saving lives. The alien watched from the cave entrance as the human soldiers disappeared into the distance, their voices fading until only the wind remained. For the first time in its adult life, the creature known in its own language as Korthak had experienced kindness from an enemy, had felt the gentle touch of healing rather than the violence of war. As it settled back into the cave to rest and heal, Korthak found itself hoping that the human medic would indeed return as promised. Neither Marcus nor Korthak could have predicted that this chance encounter would be the beginning of something that would change the course of the war itself, and perhaps even the future relationship between their two species. But, as Marcus rejoined his squad and began the journey back to base, and as Korthak drifted off to sleep in the safety of the cave, both carried with them the memory of a moment when compassion had transcended the boundaries of species and conflict. The war would continue, but something fundamental had shifted in the small space of understanding that had opened between a human medic and a wounded alien warrior. That understanding would grow and spread, but, for now, it existed as a fragile seed of hope in the darkness of an interstellar conflict, nurtured by the simple act of one being choosing to heal rather than harm. 3 days had passed since Marcus Chen had hidden the wounded alien in the cave, and the medic had barely slept since returning to the forward operating base. Every spare moment had been spent planning his return to the battlefield, gathering supplies, and, most importantly, trying to figure out how to approach his commanding officers with what he had discovered. The medical sensor he had left with the creature continued to transmit vital signs to his personal communicator, showing that the alien was not only alive but recovering steadily. The readings were unlike anything in human medical databases, but Marcus had become adept at interpreting the patterns. Heart rate was stabilizing, blood pressure was improving, and, most encouraging of all, brain activity remained high and consistent, suggesting that the creature was alert and conscious. Marcus had requisitioned additional medical supplies under the pretense of restocking for future operations, carefully selecting items that would be suitable for treating exotic physiology. Broad-spectrum antibiotics, universal blood clotting agents, and nutritional supplements that would work with a variety of biochemistries. He had also managed to acquire a portable medical scanner, a device capable of providing detailed anatomical information about unknown species. The opportunity to return to the battlefield came sooner than expected. Lieutenant Rodriguez approached Marcus during the morning briefing, his expression grim as he reviewed the tactical reports from overnight reconnaissance flights. "Chen, we've got a problem," Rodriguez said, pulling Marcus aside after dismissing the other medics. "Our long-range sensors are picking up some unusual energy signatures from the area where we conducted operations 3 days ago. Command thinks it might be Zephyrian survivors trying to activate a beacon or distress signal." Marcus felt his heart rate spike, but he kept his expression neutral. "What kind of energy signatures, sir?" "Low-level, intermittent, but definitely artificial. Could be communications equipment, could be weapons charging. Either way, we need to investigate before it becomes a problem. I'm putting together a small recon team, and I want you along in case we encounter wounded hostiles who need interrogation." The irony was not lost on Marcus. His commanding officer was unknowingly sending him back to check on the very alien he had been desperate to return to. "Understood, sir. When do we deploy?" 30 minutes. Light weapons, minimal gear. This should be a quick sweep and return mission." As Marcus prepared for the mission, his mind raced with possibilities and concerns. The energy signatures Rodriguez had mentioned were likely coming from the medical sensor he had left with the alien, but there was also a chance that other Zephyrian forces were indeed operating in the area. He would need to be extremely careful to protect both his secret patient and his fellow soldiers. The recon team consisted of Marcus, 2 infantry soldiers, and a communications specialist. They made good time across the familiar battlefield, moving efficiently between cover points and maintaining radio silence as they approached the area where Marcus had last seen the alien. As they drew closer to the cave, Marcus's communicator showed increasingly strong signals from the medical sensor, confirming that the creature was still alive and still in the location where he had left it. "Energy signatures are definitely coming from this area," reported Corporal Jackson, the team's communications specialist, as he consulted his handheld scanner. "About 50 meters to our northwest, near those rock formations." Marcus's pulse quickened as he recognized the description of the cave where he had hidden the alien. He needed to reach the creature before his teammates did, but he also couldn't abandon his duties or act suspiciously. As the team approached the cave area, Marcus made his decision. "Sir, I'm reading some unusual biological signatures on my medical scanner," Marcus said, pulling out his handheld medical device and activating its broad-spectrum detection mode. It was not exactly a lie, as the scanner was indeed picking up the alien's vital signs. "Recommend I investigate the source while you check the energy signatures. Could be wounded Zephyrians." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Good thinking, Chen. Jackson, Williams, you're with me. Chen, sweep those caves and report anything unusual. We'll check the source of the energy readings." As his teammates moved toward a cluster of boulders about 40 meters away, Marcus quickly made his way to the cave where he had left the alien. His heart pounded as he approached the entrance, unsure of what he would find after 3 days. The medical sensor readings had been encouraging, but there were so many variables he couldn't account for. Inside the cave, Marcus found a sight that took his breath away. The alien, which he had begun thinking of as wolf due to its lupin appearance, was not only alive but alert and apparently much improved. The creature had moved to a more comfortable position deeper in the cave, and Marcus could see that it had been using its claws to arrange loose stones into a more suitable resting area. Most remarkably, the alien had somehow managed to change the dressing on its wounds. The bandages Marcus had applied were neatly stacked beside its resting place, and the creature had apparently cleaned its injuries using water from a small underground spring Marcus hadn't noticed during his first visit. The wounds themselves looked remarkably good, showing signs of healing that would have been impressive even in a human patient with access to advanced medical care. When Wolf saw Marcus enter the cave, its amber eyes lit up with what could only be described as joy. The creature's tail, which Marcus hadn't paid much attention to during their first encounter, began to wag in a motion so distinctly dog-like that Marcus found himself smiling despite the dangerous circumstances. "Hey there," Marcus said softly, approaching slowly with his hands visible. "How are you feeling?" Wolf's response was immediate and startling. The creature opened its mouth and produced a series of sounds that were clearly deliberate and structured, unlike the pained whimpering Marcus had heard during their first meeting. The vocalizations had a rhythmic, almost musical quality, and Marcus realized with excitement that Wolf was attempting to communicate with him. Marcus knelt beside the creature and began his examination, pleased to find that his initial treatment had been more successful than he had dared hope. Wolf's natural healing abilities were remarkable, far exceeding anything Marcus had seen in human physiology. The plasma wound had closed cleanly, and new tissue was already beginning to regenerate beneath the scars. As Marcus worked, Wolf watched his every move with intense interest, occasionally making soft questioning sounds when the medic performed an action the creature didn't understand. It became clear that Wolf was not just accepting treatment but actively trying to learn from it, studying Marcus's techniques with the focused attention of a medical student. "Chen, report status," came Rodriguez's voice over the comm system, making Marcus jump slightly. Marcus keyed his communicator while maintaining eye contact with Wolf. "Still investigating the biological signatures, sir. Definitely something unusual here. I need a few more minutes to get a proper reading." "Copy that. We found the source of the energy readings. Looks like a damaged Zephyrian communications device, probably left behind during the retreat. We're setting charges to destroy it. Finish your sweep and meet us at the rally point in 10 minutes. Marcus felt a wave of relief that his teammates had found a plausible explanation for the energy signatures that didn't involve discovering his secret patient. But the 10-minute deadline meant he needed to work quickly. He pulled out his portable medical scanner and began taking detailed readings of Wolf's anatomy and physiology. The results were fascinating. Wolf's species had evolved a remarkably efficient cardiovascular system, with multiple hearts working in coordination to maintain circulation even when seriously injured. Their bone structure was denser than human bones but somehow lighter, suggesting adaptations for a world with different gravity. Most intriguingly, Wolf's brain showed patterns of activity that suggested not only high intelligence but also complex emotional processing. "You're not just smart, are you?" Marcus murmured as he studied the brain scans. "You're actually thinking about this whole situation, trying to figure out what it means." Wolf tilted its head at Marcus's tone, then did something that made the medic's heart skip a beat. The creature carefully extended one clawed hand and gently touched Marcus's arm, the same gesture of reassurance and trust that Marcus had used on Wolf during their first meeting. The alien had observed, learned, and was now returning the kindness. Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes as the full implications of what was happening hit him. This was not just a wounded animal he had saved. This was a first contact situation, the beginning of communication between two intelligent species that had been at war for years without ever really knowing each other. "I have to go again," Marcus said softly, beginning to pack up his equipment. "But I promise I'll be back. And next time, I'm going to bring help. Real help." Wolf seemed to understand the urgency in Marcus's voice and movements. The creature retreated deeper into the cave, positioning itself so that it would be invisible to anyone entering from outside. Before disappearing into the shadows, Wolf made a sound that was clearly intended as communication, a complex series of tones that Marcus somehow understood as gratitude and farewell. Marcus quickly gathered his equipment and jogged back to the rally point, his mind already formulating plans for his next move. He needed to find someone in the Coalition command structure who would be willing to listen to an incredible story about intelligent alien life. More importantly, he needed to find someone who would be willing to take the risk of initiating unauthorized contact with the enemy. As the recon team made its way back to base, Marcus found himself thinking about the broader implications of his discovery. Wolf was clearly intelligent, emotional, and capable of learning. If one Zephyrian possessed these qualities, it was likely that the entire species did. The Coalition had been fighting a war against beings they had assumed were mere animals, bred for combat and incapable of higher reasoning. But Marcus had seen something different in Wolf's eyes. He had seen curiosity, gratitude, and, most importantly, hope. If he could somehow establish communication with Wolf, if he could prove to his superiors that the Zephyrians were truly intelligent beings rather than bioweapons, it might be possible to end this war through negotiation rather than continued violence. The challenge would be convincing anyone to listen to his story without concrete proof, and obtaining that proof would require taking enormous risks. Marcus would need to return to Wolf repeatedly, documenting their interactions and building a case for the creature's intelligence. He would also need to find a way to protect Wolf from discovery by other Coalition forces. Back at base, Marcus immediately sought out the one person he thought might be willing to listen to his story, Dr. Sarah Morrison, the chief medical officer for the Forward Operating Base. Dr. Morrison was a xenobiology specialist who had joined the military specifically to study alien lifeforms encountered during the war. If anyone would understand the significance of Marcus's discovery, it would be her. Marcus found Dr. Morrison in her lab, analyzing tissue samples from various alien organisms encountered during recent operations. She was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and kind eyes behind thick glasses, known throughout the base for her dedication to understanding rather than simply cataloging alien life. Dr. Morrison, Marcus said, entering the lab and closing the door behind him. I need to speak with you about something urgent and confidential. Dr. Morrison looked up from her microscope, immediately sensing the seriousness in Marcus's tone. What is it, Sergeant? Marcus took a deep breath and made his decision. I'd made contact with an intelligent Zephyrian. A wounded combat unit that I've been treating for the past 3 days. Doctor, I think we've been fighting a war against sapient beings, not animals. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Morrison set down her equipment and turned to face Marcus fully, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Marcus thought she was going to dismiss his claims as combat stress or delusion. Instead, she leaned forward with intense interest. Tell me everything, she said simply. For the next hour, Marcus recounted every detail of his encounters with Wolf, from the initial discovery through their most recent interaction. He showed Dr. Morrison the medical sensor readings, the brain scan data, and, most importantly, the video recordings he had made with his personal communicator during his examination of the creature. Dr. Morrison watched the footage with growing excitement, pausing frequently to study Wolf's reactions and behaviors. When the video showed Wolf returning Marcus's gesture of comfort, she actually gasped out loud. My God, she whispered. This is incredible. This creature is not only intelligent, it's emotionally sophisticated. Look at the way it's processing your actions, learning from them, adapting its behavior. This is exactly what we would expect to see in a highly evolved social species. Marcus felt a wave of relief at having his observations validated by a scientific expert. Dr. Morrison, I think we have an opportunity here. If I can continue building a relationship with this creature, if I can establish real communication, maybe we can find a way to end this war. Dr. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the implications of Marcus's suggestion. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with determination. Sergeant Chen, what you're proposing is extremely dangerous and completely against regulations. It could be considered treason under military law. She paused, then smiled. When do we start? 2 weeks had passed since Dr. Morrison had agreed to join Marcus in his secret mission to establish communication with Wolf. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save a wounded alien had evolved into the most significant xenological breakthrough in human history. Working together, the medic and the scientist had made remarkable progress in understanding Wolf's language, culture, and, most importantly, his role in Zephyrian society. Dr. Morrison had proven invaluable in documenting their interactions with Wolf, bringing sophisticated recording equipment and linguistic analysis software to their clandestine meetings. She had also provided cover for Marcus's frequent absences from base, authorizing research expeditions that allowed him to visit the cave without arousing suspicion. Wolf, whose actual name they had learned was something closer to Korthak Velshan in his own language, had proven to be not just intelligent but remarkably eager to communicate with his human visitors. During their sessions together, Korthak had demonstrated an impressive ability to learn human words and concepts, while also patiently teaching Marcus and Dr. Morrison elements of Zephyrian language and culture. The breakthrough had come when Dr. Morrison realized that Zephyrian communication involved not just vocalizations but also subtle changes in the color and pattern of their natural armor plating. Once they understood this visual component, the complexity and richness of Korthak's attempts at communication became clear. He was not just making sounds, he was painting thoughts and emotions across his body in patterns of light and color. Through painstaking work, they had learned that Korthak was not merely a soldier but a healer, a member of what could best be described as Zephyrian military medical corps. His role in the battle where Marcus had found him was similar to Marcus's own duties, moving across the battlefield to aid wounded comrades, regardless of the personal danger involved. The irony was profound. A human combat medic and an alien combat medic had found each other in the aftermath of battle, and their shared dedication to healing had bridged the gap between their species. Korthak's eagerness to learn human medical techniques matched Marcus's fascination with Zephyrian physiology and healing practices. But their most significant discovery was Korthak's revelation about the nature of the war itself. Through careful translation and patient explanation, Korthak had revealed that the Zephyrians had never wanted this conflict. They were defending what they believed to be sacred sites from human expansion, locations that held deep religious and cultural significance for their species. The humans, unaware of these sites' importance, had established colonies and military installations in areas the Zephyrians considered holy ground. What the coalition saw as unprovoked aggression was actually a desperate attempt by the Zephyrians to protect their most sacred places from what they perceived as desecration. "We fight not for conquest," Korthak had explained during one of their sessions, his armor plates shifting through patterns of deep blue and silver that Dr. Morrison had learned indicated sadness and regret. "We fight to protect the singing stones where our ancestors' souls rest. Your people build machines where our spirits dwell." This revelation had shaken both Marcus and Dr. Morrison to their core. The war that had claimed thousands of lives on both sides was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. The Zephyrians were not a conquering force seeking to expand their territory, they were a defensive culture trying to protect their most sacred sites from unknowing invaders. Marcus knew that this information needed to reach Coalition Command immediately, but he also knew that his story would be dismissed without concrete proof. A combat medic claiming to have learned alien languages and uncovered the secret motivations behind the war would sound like the ravings of someone suffering from severe combat stress. The solution came from an unexpected source. During their latest visit to Korthak, the alien healer had made a startling proposal. He wanted to return with them to the human base, to speak directly with their leaders and offer to serve as an intermediary between the two species. "I am healer," Korthak had said, his armor plates displaying patterns of determination and hope. "Healers are trusted by all packs, even enemy packs. I can speak for my people if your leaders will listen." The proposal was as dangerous as it was unprecedented. Bringing an alien combatant onto a coalition military base would be considered an act of treason by any reasonable interpretation of military law. But it might also be the only way to end a war that neither side truly wanted to fight. Marcus and Dr. Morrison spent hours debating the risks and potential outcomes. In the end, it was Dr. Morrison who proposed the solution that would allow them to move forward. "We don't bring him to the base," she explained as they sat with Korthak in the cave that had become their unofficial embassy. "We bring the base to him. General Harrison is scheduled to visit our forward operating base next week for a quarterly inspection. If we can get him to this location, if we can arrange a controlled first contact scenario, we might be able to make this work." The plan they developed was complex and fraught with risk, but it was their best chance of success. Dr. Morrison would request a private meeting with General Harrison, claiming to have made a significant xenological discovery that required his immediate attention. She would guide him to the cave, ostensibly to examine alien artifacts, but actually to meet Korthak. Marcus would be present to provide medical support and to serve as a translator, having become quite proficient in basic Zephyrian communication. Korthak would remain in the cave, positioned so that he would appear non-threatening but still clearly visible when the general arrived. The key to the plan's success would be Korthak's ability to demonstrate his intelligence and peaceful intentions within the first few moments of contact. They had rehearsed the encounter repeatedly, with Korthak practicing human gestures of greeting and non-aggression. General Harrison arrived at the forward operating base exactly on schedule, a distinguished officer in his 60s who had earned his reputation through decisive action and willingness to listen to his subordinates' expertise. Dr. Morrison approached him during the evening briefing, her request for a private consultation couched in terms that would pique his scientific curiosity without revealing the true nature of what she wanted to show him. "General, I've discovered something during my xenological surveys that I believe could significantly impact our strategic understanding of this conflict," Dr. Morrison explained as she led Harrison away from the main base toward the battlefield site. "I need to show you something that I think will change how we approach this entire war." Marcus met them at the designated coordinates, his medical kit in hand and his heart pounding with nervous anticipation. Everything they had worked for over the past weeks would be decided in the next few minutes. If General Harrison reacted with hostility or fear, if he ordered Korthak to be destroyed or captured, their fragile alliance would be shattered and any chance for peace would be lost. Sergeant Chen, General Harrison acknowledged as they approached the cave area.
Dr. Morrison tells me you've been instrumental in this discovery. What exactly are we here to see?
Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Dr. Morrison, then took a deep breath. Sir, we've discovered that the Zephyrian forces are not what we believe them to be.
They're not animals or bioweapons.
They're intelligent beings with their own culture, language, and motivations for fighting this war.
General Harrison's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. That's a serious claim, Sergeant. What evidence do you have to support this assessment? Instead of answering directly, Marcus led them to the cave entrance.
Sir, I'd like to introduce you to the evidence. His name is Korthak, and he's been waiting to meet you.
The moment when General Harrison first saw Korthak would be burned into Marcus's memory forever.
The general's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, but he didn't draw the weapon, instead studying the alien with the sharp analytical gaze that had made him one of the coalition's most effective commanders. Korthak, for his part, performed exactly as they had rehearsed. He remained in a relaxed position that displayed no aggression, his armor plates shifting through patterns that Marcus now recognized as formal greeting colors among his species. Most importantly, Korthak spoke, his words carefully pronounced in the English phrases Marcus had taught him. Greetings, General Harrison, Korthak said, his deep voice carrying the careful cadence of someone speaking a foreign language. I am Korthak, healer of the Silver Wind Pack. I come to speak of peace between our peoples. The silence that followed was deafening. General Harrison stared at Korthak for what felt like an eternity, his expression cycling through disbelief, amazement, and, finally, calculation. Marcus could see the general's strategic mind working, processing the implications of what he was witnessing.
My God, Harrison finally whispered. They're not just intelligent.
They're civilized. He looked at Marcus and Dr. Morrison with new respect.
How long have you been in contact with him?
3 weeks, sir, Marcus replied. Since I found him wounded after the battle at grid reference 7742. He's taught us about Zephyrian culture, their language, and, most importantly, why they're fighting this war. Over the next 2 hours, Korthak patiently explained the Zephyrian perspective on the conflict, with Marcus and Dr. Morrison providing translation when needed. General Harrison listened intently as Korthak described the sacred sites, the religious significance of the contested territories, and his people's desperate desire to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict. When Korthak finished his explanation, General Harrison was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the enormous implications of what he had learned. Finally, he turned to face the alien directly.
Korthak, I want to believe that peace is possible between our peoples.
But there are military commanders on both sides who see only enemies, not potential allies.
How do we convince them to stop fighting long enough to listen? Korthak's armor plates shifted to patterns of deep thought and determination.
I am not only healer, he explained carefully.
I am also son of pack leader, what you would call general. My father leads many packs in this sector.
If I return to my people with proof of human willingness to make peace, he will listen.
He will make others listen.
General Harrison nodded slowly.
And, what would constitute proof of our willingness to make peace?
You could release our wounded, Korthak suggested. Your forces have captured several of my pack brothers. If they were returned unharmed, it would show that humans understand honor of healers' work. Marcus felt his heart racing as he realized what Korthak was proposing. The coalition did indeed hold several Zephyrian prisoners, captured during recent operations and held for interrogation. If they were released as a gesture of good faith, it would represent an unprecedented act of trust between the two species.
I'll need to make some communications, General Harrison said finally. This goes far beyond my authority to authorize.
But I think I can make the case to command that we have a unique opportunity here. As the general activated his secure communicator to contact coalition headquarters, Marcus looked at Korthak and saw something that filled him with hope. The alien's armor plates were displaying patterns of bright gold and silver, colors that Marcus had learned indicated joy and optimism among Korthak's people. 3 days later, a historic exchange took place on the battlefield where Marcus had first found Korthak. 5 wounded Zephyrian prisoners were released to a delegation of alien healers, led by Korthak's father, a magnificent creature whose natural authority was immediately apparent to all present. The exchange was conducted with formal ceremony on both sides, with Marcus serving as translator and Dr. Morrison documenting every moment for the historical record.
When Korthak was reunited with his father, the emotional display between the two aliens brought tears to the eyes of several human observers. But the real breakthrough came when Korthak's father, speaking through his son as translator, made an unprecedented offer. The Zephyrians would provide detailed maps of all their sacred sites throughout the contested territories. In exchange, they requested that the coalition establish protected zones around these areas, with Zephyrian healers and human medics working together to care for wounded from both sides. The proposal was revolutionary: joint medical stations that would serve as neutral ground where humans and Zephyrians could interact peacefully, healing wounds both physical and cultural. It was a small step, but it represented the beginning of something much larger. 6 months later, Sergeant Marcus Chin stood in the newly established joint medical facility at the former site of Forward Operating Base Delta, watching as human and Zephyrian medical personnel work side by side to treat casualties from both species. The war had not ended completely, but the establishment of neutral zones and joint medical facilities had dramatically reduced the intensity of the conflict. Korthak served as the chief liaison between human and Zephyrian medical staff, his fluency in both languages and deep understanding of both cultures making him invaluable in bridging the gap between the two species. He and Marcus had become close friends, bonding over their shared commitment to healing and their role in bringing about this unprecedented cooperation. Dr. Morrison had been promoted to head the coalition's new Xenological Communication Division, tasked with expanding contact with Zephyrian culture and exploring possibilities for broader diplomatic engagement. Her work with Korthak had become the foundation for a growing understanding between the two species. General Harrison, meanwhile, had become an advocate for expanded diplomatic contact, arguing that the coalition's future lay not in conquest but in cooperation with the intelligent species they encountered as humanity expanded into the galaxy. As Marcus watched human and Zephyrian medical personnel working together to save lives, he reflected on the chain of events that had brought them to this moment. It had all started with a simple choice: to see a wounded being as a patient rather than an enemy, to choose healing over violence when faced with suffering. The war between humans and Zephyrians was far from over, but the foundation for peace had been laid by the simple act of one combat medic choosing to save a life rather than take one. It was, Marcus thought, a perfect example of what made humanity special in the galaxy: the willingness to extend compassion even to former enemies, and the courage to take risks in the service of hope. Korthak approached Marcus as his shift ended, his armor plates displaying the warm golden patterns that Marcus now knew indicated friendship and contentment. "Your people have a saying," Korthak said in English that had become nearly fluent over the months of their collaboration, "that healing begins with a single step." Today we take many steps together toward healing our people's wounds. Marcus smiled and placed a hand on his friend's shoulder, the gesture that had become their traditional greeting. "And it all started with you trusting a human medic to help rather than harm." "No," Korthak corrected gently, his armor shifting to patterns of deep respect and gratitude. "It started with a human medic choosing to see a person rather than an enemy. That choice saved more than my life, Marcus. It may have saved both our species." As the two healers stood together watching their colleagues work to save lives regardless of species, Marcus realized that Korthak was right. The simple choice to treat a wounded being with compassion had indeed changed everything. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important battles were not won with weapons, but with the courage to choose hope over fear, understanding over hatred, and healing over harm. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges that humanity would face as it continued to explore and expand. But if they could maintain that fundamental commitment to seeing other beings as people rather than enemies, if they could continue to choose healing over harm when faced with the unknown, then perhaps humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy would not be their military might or technological prowess, but their capacity for compassion and their willingness to extend that compassion even to those who had once been their enemies. In a universe often driven by conflict and competition, that simple human tendency to heal rather than harm might just be the key to a future where intelligent species could work together rather than against each other.
And it had all begun with one medic's decision to save a life rather than take one, to see a wounded being rather than an enemy target. The future remained uncertain, but, as Marcus looked around the medical facility where former enemies now worked side by side to preserve life, he felt something he had not experienced since the beginning of the war: genuine hope that peace was not only possible, but inevitable, as long as there were people willing to choose compassion over conflict when the moment demanded courage.